I'm curious to hear from you who you feel like the Texas Lawyers Mount Rushmore is, if you could put one together for us.
Yeah, well, first off, I don't consider myself to be an OG. As I said at the eulogy of the first guy that I want to talk about, Racehorse Haynes, if I'm tall, it's because I stood on the shoulders of a 5'8" giant. I mean, every generation should learn from the generation before them. I do think, going a little bit sideways, I'm at the older end of the spectrum of criminal defense lawyers. I get that, and I'm sure every generation feels this way. But I don't think the generation behind us, and by us I mean 65-ish-year-old lawyers, has the respect for us 65-year-olds that I had for Mr. Haynes, or Mr. Jamail, or Mr. DeGuerin, or Mr. Hardin. I think some of that because everybody's in a 15 seconds of fame mindset. That they don't really appreciate the paths that were plowed ahead of them. But anyway, the first guy that I would want to put, and again, Aaron, if we were talking about this 15 years ago, I would have included Percy Foreman. I would have included different. But today's, in my view, Mount Rushmore, the first, in my view, would be my mentor, Racehorse Haynes. We've talked about him before, but I don't think I can talk about him enough because he was really kind of the alpha and the omega of my career. But Richard was at Iwo Jima at 17 years old. He lied about his age and was at Iwo. He would later go into the Korean War, so he was both a Marine and a paratrooper in the Air Force, so two different branches. He was a Golden Gloves boxer. He was, quien es más macho guy. The guys wanted to be like him, and the women wanted to be with him. But Richard won 163 DWIs in a row, 163 cases in a row. Different times. We didn't have the scientific machines and all that. But just do the math. 163 wins in a row. I don't think I've ever eaten dinner correctly 163 times in a row. I mean, that's a remarkable stat. He won the T. Cullen Davis trial, which was, in my view, the hardest series of trials ever. John Hill, he and I tried the Slave Ranch trial. I mean, he was an incredible lawyer. The thing that stood out to me about Richard, as compared to at least one other guy we'll get to in a second, he was always gracious. He was always decent. He's always kind. He was not only a great lawyer, he was a great man. And, I miss him every day.
I mean, what a Golden Glove boxer, on top of all that, what a fucking badass. It reminds me of that Wilt Chamberlain picture, because he has the infamous 100-point basketball game, and there's a picture of him holding the 100-point sign. The 163, I wish I had maybe AI generated picture of Racehorse Haynes holding that up, because that's fucking insane. When you hear those numbers, tell me how do you feel?
I mean, I just wish I could. There are a couple of videos online of Racehorse, which I hope one day we'll be able to react to. But I just want to be able to have some video of him, because eventually it's going to get to a point where if you're not online and you're not on YouTube, people are just going to kind of forget. You know,
people have already forgotten.
Yeah.
As I mentioned on another episode, I will speak at many times, but at least 3 or 4 times a year. I'll put a picture of Mr. Haynes up at a legal seminar, with lawyers, and then Percy Foreman, who's not on this list, who if we could have 5, he should be, whatever. Who in the room know this guy? In a room, 150 lawyers, maybe 2 people.
Wow,
and Richard just passed away in 2017. It's not like he's been gone for a generation, right? But it's that 15 seconds now of fame that everybody thinks their generation and they are more important than the one that preceded them. So.
I mean, it's cool. His legacy, it stays alive through you, Dan, and the stories that you share and this archive of content that we're building. And we can't talk about Racehorse Haynes enough, because it's the dude was just a fucking badass. And you don't make guys like this anymore. I feel like it just feels like the kind of range and the aura this has is crazy, man.
Was Racehorse obsessed with work, or did he have hobbies that he enjoyed outside of the courtroom?
No. Haynes had a good time.
He had a good time.
I think there were periods where his focus and his work ethic, plateaued and waned and peaked, and like all of us. But Haynes had a good time. There's no question. There's no question about that. Some good times we probably won't go into.
And for this graphic, Dan, we're gonna have the actual Mount Rushmore, and then the faces come up of each. So I love the Haynes picture with the just smoking on that good. But Who do you got next? Who's your other spot on the Mount Rushmore?
That'd be Joseph Dar Jamail Jr. Joe was the first lawyer that became a billionaire through the practice. Joe passed away 5-6 years ago. So in his peak, which is probably 20 years ago, he had, do the math on this, he had 5 verdicts over $100 million. We're talking about in the 90s and the 2000s.
Wow.
He had 200 verdicts for more than $1 million. Pennzoil versus Texaco was in 1985, I think, 1984 or 5, and he successful represented Pennzoil against Texaco and got a $10.5 billion with a B verdict in 1984, which was just all the money in the world. The thing about Joe, he was, I mean, Richard was charming and witty and fun and nice to hang out with. Joe could be as caustic and as corrosive. He could also be funny and charming, but he was a force of nature. I mean, he did not suffer a fool lightly at all. I was researching him before, and I'd forgotten his story, but at the end of his career, he was representing a police officer who'd been injured in a car wreck, and the opposing lawyer had offered like a $300,000 to settle the case, and Joe said, "I want you to write that down." And the opposing lawyer said, "Well, I'll put it on the record, I'll put it on the transcript, because what you want to do as a plaintiff's lawyer and as a defense lawyer, you want to make a record of what the offer is, so if it goes sideways later on, you've got something to rely upon." And Joe said, "No, I don't want it on the record. I want you to write it down on a piece of paper so I can shove that offer up your ass."
Dog.
And he got, I think in the $300,000 offer, I think they got like $7 million or something. But Joe was he was a beast in every sense of the word.
Damn, that's crazy. First billionaire lawyer. So the Pennzoil versus Texaco was really a big part of that.
Of course.
Yeah.
But Joe was, I mean, that was certainly the crown, if you will. But he was still the most recognized plaintiff's lawyer of his generation, with or without Texaco, for sure.
Wow.
You know what I love too is these guys, their names just like Joe Jamail is just like a badass name.
Yeah. Richard Racehorse Haynes, Joe Jamail. It's like, man.
Well, you look, you're talking
Wait
about
till the next one too.
Literally a different generation, right? So Joe was a Marine. He was in World War II, and those guys, I mean, they went through the Great Depression. They went through World War II. They had life experiences that us little soft asses don't have, right? And you've got kids in law school these days that carry around their little furry animals and want to have a safe space and don't want to work more than 8 hours a day. That's just not in the lexicon of a Jamail or a Haynes. It's just a different generation, and I don't think those guys got it wrong, frankly.
Is that Joe up there in the photo?
That is Joe up there in the photo. Now, so I want you to look at his shoes, okay?
Yeah.
So his shoes. This guy was worth several $100 million at the time that is taken. But Joe was, a man of the people. He didn't need, Seville Row suits. He didn't want, $7,000 shoes. He wanted to be able to relate to people. And in fact, in the Texaco case, and I was actually there the day of the final argument, because my dad worked for Texaco, and Dad had every penny he had in retirement in Texaco stock, right? Mm-hmm. So I was lucky enough to be friends with the Jamail family, with Randall and distantly Joe at that time. But I went over and watched the final argument, and this is the biggest civil case literally in history up to this time, right? Mm-hmm. And Joe would bring his paper sack lunch and put it on the counsel table so the jury would know, hey, I'm just a regular guy. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know, the food might have been flown in from France. Who knows? But Joe had the patina, the facade, real or imagined, of just being a regular guy that the jury could warm up to.
So those are cowboy boots.
Those are not cowboy boots. Joe wore kind of beetle boots looking things. Okay. Wasn't a fashion king, but he was a force.
That wool felted suit is nice too. He looks like a straight up.
It looks like a movie star.
Swaggy, yeah.
You think
so? When he beat Texaco, did that hurt your dad's stocks?
Well, it's funny because the legend has it, and I think it's true. So Joe's winning this trial, right? And everybody thinks he's going to win. And so I go over for the final argument, and the final argument was, it was okay, but it wasn't the greatest thing ever. And legend has it that Darrell Royal and Willie Nelson, who Joe was very close to, both DKR, who was at one time the coach of the University of Texas football team, and Willie Nelson. And if you don't know who Willie Nelson is, fuck you. But he was close to both, and they came into town the night before final argument, and Joe got, as the legend has it, overserved. So the final argument was not a thing of beauty, right? But he gives the final argument. I'm there, and there was a fellow on the jury that was nicknamed Ignatius, who was a figure from the book Confederacy of Dunces, because he kind of looked like Ignatius from the Confederacy of Dunces. And after Joe gave the final argument, Ignatius turned around to Mr. Jamail and gave him a thumbs up, which was a pretty good sign that things were going to go his way. So I called my dad, and this is before cell phones. And I called my dad, and I said, Dad, I had to run across the street to the criminal courthouse because I knew there was a payphone there, and all the payphones in civil courthouse were taken up. So I ran across the street to a payphone. I called my dad and said, Dad, this is not looking good. You might want to sell some of that stock. No. Houston is a Texaco town. They're never going to vote against Texaco. And, okay. And sure enough, they came back with a $10.5 billion verdict. Texaco declared bankruptcy. My dad's stock went to next to nothing for years. It eventually drove back up. But, my dad was not near the Jamail fan that I was.
Not near the Jamail fan, but he must have, at least respected you after, shit, man, my son knows what he's talking about. Next time I'll probably listen to him. But you mentioned how he kind of keeps it humble with Joe before we move on to the next member of the Texas Mount Rushmore that Dan put together. He's kind of a little more humble with the way he dresses and kind of how. Do you feel like it's an issue with lawyers today, how they showboat and what they wear, what they drive, all that shit?
Yeah, we've covered that ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine what Joe would have said. Look, or Mr. Haynes, or Mr. DeGuerin, or Mr. Hardin. Any of these guys looking at some of the ways that some of the current lawyers present themselves, civil court, criminal court. It's just, anyway, don't get me started.
I see a little bit of similarities between you and Joe Jamail and Richard Racehorse Haynes, that you guys keep it professional, you guys dress nice, but all three of you, from what I've heard from stories, there's a little bit of I'm going to be genuine to myself, and I'm not going to really care too much. I'm going to drive an F-150. I'm going to wear a cowboy boots, compared to maybe California lawyers or New York lawyers. Do you see that sort of? Do you agree with that sort of take, where these lawyers, do have a little bit of an identity?
I think the best way for me to answer that is, look, I try cases all over Texas. I've tried cases in 16 different states. But particularly as a criminal defense lawyer, if I show up in Seguin, Texas, or I show up in Waxahachie and I'm driving a Jaguar, or I'm getting out of a BMW, a juror there in Ellis County or wherever is going to look at me like, really? I mean, they know I ain't from Waxahachie, right? Mm-hmm. They know I'm not from Hayes County, whatever. So. First off, I like driving a truck. I like the elevation of it, and I like not having to worry about it when it's parked somewhere. But part of it is just kind of survival and instinct. You don't show up driving a Mercedes G-Wagon, which I think should be outlawed anyway. It's just the ultimate pretender car. Sorry, I've got at least two friends with G-Wagons. I don't get that. I never have get that. Go to fucking Aspen in your G-Wagon. But it's just who I am. I've had Ferraris. I've had Lamborghinis. And that's not to brag. It's really to say it's just like a boat. Is the best 2 days of your life is when you buy one and when you sell one. That obsession, that passion, that infatuation, it goes away real quick after you drive one.
So Dan, we got Richard Racehorse Haynes, we got Joe. Who's up next?
Dick DeGuerin. So Dick is and so the next two guys, that is Dick and Rusty, are still practicing. Mr. Haynes and Mr. Jamail are passed. But Dick, I think, is 83, 84, still practicing. He worked for Percy Foreman, who was another iconic, legendary Mount Rushmore guy. Dick was from Austin, came here to Houston, practiced at the DA's office for a couple of years, and then went to work for Butler Binion, then went to work for Mr. Foreman, and was on his own. I think he started DeGuerin and Dixon in 1982 or 1983, where he's still there. But Dick is your iconic Texas criminal defense lawyer, boot-wearing, cowboy hat, friends with the Texas Rangers kind of guy. Pardon me. I guess his most famous case is the Robert Durst case, where Durst, who was a billionaire his own self from New York City, who was a cross-dressing recluse, if you can even string those concepts together, in Galveston, and he killed his next-door neighbor, chopped up the next-door neighbor's body, put it in bags, and buried it or threw it in the Galveston Bay, and they recovered Durst or his neighbor's pieces one by one. And Dick, along with Mike Ramsey and others, successfully represented Mr. Durst in that. He represented Koresh during the standoff. He represented K. Bailey Hutchison, who was a U.S. Senator, represented Tom DeLay. Dick was the go-to criminal defense lawyer here in Houston for a generation at least.
That's crazy. K. Bailey Hutchinson gave a speech at one of my graduations. What did she get in trouble for?
That's a good question. It was a case that Dick tried in Austin. I'm not sure the details of it, but my former employer, Judge John F. Onion Jr., was the presiding judge on the case, and I know that he ultimately instructed the state out, and Dick persevered, but I can't remember the offense.
Yeah, no worries. We can look that up.
Did you ever go against any of these lawyers on this Mount Rushmore list?
I have tried cases with and against DeGuerin. I have tried cases with and against my friend Rusty, who's next. So
up next is
Russell Hardin, Russell Hardin Jr., a.k.a. Rusty. Rusty is, where do you start with Rusty? He's from a little town in North Carolina, which he likens to sort of Andy of Mayberry or whatever that town was. He represented Rudy Tomjanovich. He represented Warren Moon. He represented Wade Boggs. All successfully Scottie Pippen, Roger Clemens. If you were a pro athlete or are a pro athlete and you got in trouble in or around Houston or, frankly, around the country, he was kind of the go-to guy. The remarkable thing about Rusty is people that don't know him think that he's arrogant or condescending. He's probably the nicest lawyer I've ever known. He's just lovely to be around. He's got, any good lawyer's got an ego, and he's with red hair, or Rusty, where the name comes from. I think his hair had a red tint to it back then. He got a little bit of temper, but he's simply the most decent, honest lawyer I know. I trust Rusty immensely. He's a good friend. I just adore him. He's a wonderful guy. He too is a little longer in the tooth. He doesn't like people telling or knowing how old he is, so I won't snitch him. But I've tried a number of cases with him. He's been gracious enough to me over the years to refer me a number of cases, as has Dick. They were both on the other side of us in the Ken Paxton impeachment trial. I'm not going to say we won or they lost, but the outcome was in our favor. I think, look, and I'm not trying to be clever. I don't think we won that case. I don't think we lost that case. It was politically driven. We had more Republicans, which obviously Paxton was, and there were Democrats. So we had a numerical advantage. That having been said, that's apropos of nothing. I admire him greatly. He's just a wonderful lawyer and a wonderful man.